This video is a quick start guide for our divorce accrual calculation template. Our template enables users to calculate the accrual value which the one party in a divorce owes to the other party. We're on the accrual sheet. This is where the accrual balances are calculated and the amount due is determined. This sheet requires no user input and all calculations are automated based on the information entered on the other sheets. As you can see, there is an assets section where all assets of the plaintiff and the defendant, as included on the asset sheet, are included and a total asset value is calculated. Below that is the liabilities section where all liabilities, as included on the liability sheet, are included and totals for both the plaintiff and defendant are calculated. The net estate value for each of the parties is then calculated before the inflation-adjusted commencement values are deducted to get to a net accrual value for each of the parties. The party with the largest net accrual value will then owe the party with the lowest net accrual value half of the difference in net accrual value. As you can see, we calculate the total accrual value, which is the difference between the net accrual values of the two parties, and then we determine the amount due by the one party to the other as half of the difference. The template automatically indicates which party will owe the other party. Let's now review the information on the other sheets, which form part of the template. We'll start with the setup sheet. You can include the names of the plaintiff and defendant to refer to them specifically instead of the generic plaintiff and defendant references, and then include your commencement values. These values are defined in your prenuptial agreement. You also need to include your CPI index values at the commencement date, which is the date of the marriage, and the dissolution date, which is the date of the end of the marriage. If you need to look up the appropriate CPI values, you can just Google Stats SA CPI Table B, and you should see it in the first couple of search results. Just open the table and look up the commencement date. You can then also look up the dissolution date or use the last data in the table if you do not have a specific dissolution date. The CPI factor is then calculated by basically dividing the dissolution value by the commencement value. This factor is then applied to your initial commencement values to calculate your inflation-adjusted values, which is included in the accrual calculation on the accrual sheet. Let's now look at the asset sheet. All the assets of the plaintiff and defendant are included here. You then need to define a plaintiff value or percentage for each asset, and the defendant value is calculated based on what you define as the plaintiff value. So if you include a property which is jointly owned by the plaintiff and defendant, you may have a 50% plaintiff value, and your defendant value will automatically be the other 50%. You can also include 100% or include the full value if the asset is owned only by the plaintiff. So the template is really flexible in terms of how to include assets and liability values. Most of the other columns are just used to populate the automated accrual calculation on the accrual sheet. Only the columns with yellow column headings require user input, and the columns with light blue column headings contain formulas which are copied automatically when you add assets or liabilities to the appropriate sheets. Let's look at the liability sheet next. This sheet works similarly to the asset sheet. The user input columns also require specifying a plaintiff value or a plaintiff percentage, and the defendant values are calculated as the balancing figures. Just take note of the status cell which is included at the top of both the assets and liability sheets. Our default accrual calculation will include 15 assets and 15 liabilities. If there are more assets or liabilities in the individual sheets for a particular party, those lines are not automatically included on the accrual sheet. The status cell at the top of the sheet will, however, show an add message and the number of rows that you need to add to the appropriate section on the accrual sheet. So if you see a status or add 2 or add 3, You'll insert 2 or 3 rows on the accrual sheet in the appropriate section for assets or liabilities, and you'll just copy the formula in the last row and paste it into the new rows that you've added. It's as easy as that. Everything else is updated automatically. So the accrual calculation is calculated automatically, and this will give you a very good indication of what your accrual value is. It is still subjective in terms of which assets and liabilities are included by the legal representatives of the plaintiff or the defendant, but you can do sensitivities around the calculations by using various calculation scenarios. Finally, just go through the end of the calculation again. A net accrual value is calculated for each party. The total accrual is calculated by deducting the smaller net accrual value from the largest value, and the accrual amount due is calculated as half of the total accrual value. That's basically it. You now know how to use our unique divorce accrual calculation template to calculate the accrual amount due in divorce proceedings. Remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more unique Microsoft Excel-based calculation solutions.